being fed propaganda.
What does the US want?
No one has our back. It is like a joke to prove its right to exist. Big historical fabrication.
In this global struggle that we find ourselves in, Israel relies heavily on the US, both for the legitimacy on the world stage and also to supply its ammunition. So it's very clear what Israel wants. What does the US want?
Israel depends. I don't think we actually need to depend. I think it's time that we cut that dependency, or at least, weakened it, because we know the script. America's not here because they love us, from the bottom of their hearts. We know what happened in World War II when they turned us away at their borders. Biden's been a friend, and for that we are grateful. But it's time that Israel understood that no one has our back. No one has ever had our backs, and no one's going to have our backs here. We need to do what's in our best interests, whether or not the U.S. gives us the support. From a U.S. perspective, obviously, Israel gives a ton to the U.S., from our innovation and technology, of course, to having an ally, a democratic ally in the Middle East. So, this is definitely a two-way relationship, unlike, what many anti-Semites in the United States would have you believe, as if, they're giving us billions of dollars of foreign aid and getting nothing in return. Could not be farther from the truth.
Yes, of course, they're using Israel as the best example of the weapon that they sell all across the world, and I think we're giving them much more for this investment than actually what they invest. So if you break down the picture into age, you see something very interesting. Above 65 in the US, we have very strong support. I believe the number from Ynet was only 4% of the US citizens above 65 believe that Israel should end as a country. But when you look at the younger population, 18 to 24, the picture is very different. 51% think that this struggle in the area would end when Israel ends. Why do you think there's such a gap between the ages?
Tik Tok. That's it.
TikTok.
Tik Tok Generation, right? I mean, this is their classroom today, and you don't have to look too far. You could see that there's a trend on TikTok of American youth standing and declaring their support for bin Laden and 9/11. I mean, it doesn't get more morally bankrupt than that. And so, this is where these Gen Zers get their information, from TikTok, and they're being fed propaganda. And it's very, very sad and unfortunate. But again, the fact that we're even discussing, the fact that it's even part of the dialogue, whether Israel has a right to exist, what other country in the world has to prove its right to exist? It is like a joke. We are so ingrained in Western civilization that the narrative being perpetuated over and over and over again, no matter whether it's true or a complete lie, we also are starting to let it seep in. We have to remember that Israel has a right to exist, just like any country has a right to exist. And the very discussion of whether or not we have a right to exist in and of itself is morally bankrupt. And we have to not give into that narrative, because it's one big historical fabrication, just like everything else in this war. So yesterday, the UN concluded its resolutions for 2023. They have 14 resolutions against Israel and 7 resolutions against the rest of the world combined.
Yeah.
So, if that doesn't tell you just how morally bankrupt the UN is, then nothing will. The reality is, it's the oldest hatred in the world. It's the hatred of Jews. I know that that's an easy answer and say, blame everything on anti-Semitism. But the reality is this double standard is staggering. And the hypocrisy in the global community is, on the one hand, hard to believe. On the other hand, it should be a surprise to no one, because we're used to it from our history. The script repeats itself over and over and over again. And the reality is that hopefully now, for the first time in our history, our leaders will understand that we need to make our own decisions. We need to stand up and defend ourselves and not be at the mercy of any other government, because, again, we've been down that road and we know what happens when we depend on other governments.